On Christmas Eve, 1945, the Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, went up in flames, and 5 of the children vanished without a trace. But when the smoke cleared, firefighters made a chilling discovery. There were no bodies. Not a single bone or tooth was ever found in the ash, and so began a lifelong search for a heartbroken family, and one of America's most bizarre and haunting unsolved mysteries. Were the Sodder children consumed by the fire, or were they stolen into the night? At the heart of this mystery was the Sodder family. George Sodder was the American dream come to life. An immigrant from Sardinia, Italy, he came to the United States at just 13 years old and, through sheer hard work, built a successful trucking business. He and his wife, Jenny Cipriani, also an Italian immigrant, settled in the small coal mining town of Fayetteville, home to a large Italian community. The Sodders were a respected middle-class family with 10 children, and their large 2-story wooden home was always bustling with life. But George was a man of strong opinions, and he wasn't afraid to share them. He was a passionate vocal critic of the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, which often caused friction with others in Fayetteville's Italian community who supported the fascist regime. These arguments were public and sometimes heated, creating an undercurrent of tension in their otherwise happy lives. In the months before Christmas of 1945, a series of strange events began to unfold. That fall, a life insurance salesman got angry after George turned him down. He warned George that his anti-Mussolini talk would come back to haunt him, allegedly threatening that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. Not long after, another man showed up at the house asking for work. He pointed to the fuse boxes at the back of the house and told George they'd cause a fire someday. This was strange to George. He'd just had the whole house rewired and inspected when they installed a new electric stove, and he knew it was perfectly safe. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, the older Sodder sons noticed a strange car parked on the highway, its occupants just watching the younger children as they walked home from school. At the time, these seemed like strange, unrelated incidents. In hindsight, they became the sinister prologue to an unimaginable tragedy. Christmas Eve of 1945 started with joy. Marion, the eldest daughter at home, brought presents for her younger siblings from the dime store where she worked. 12-year-old Martha, 8-year-old Jenny, and 5-year-old Betty were so excited they begged their mother to let them stay up late. Jenny agreed, just reminding them to feed the cows and close up the chicken coop before bed. 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old Louis were also allowed to stay up. Around 10 p.m, Jenny and George went to their downstairs bedroom with their youngest child, 2-year-old Sylvia. The house grew quiet. At about 12:30 a.m, the phone rang, startling Jenny awake. The woman on the other end asked for a name Jenny had never heard of. In the background, Jenny could hear laughter and clinking glasses, like from a party. She told the woman she had the wrong number and hung up, but the call left her feeling uneasy. On her way back to bed, she noticed the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. In their excitement, the kids had forgotten their chores. Jenny shut the curtains, turned off the lights, and assumed the children were all sound asleep in their attic bedrooms. She had just drifted off when a loud bang on the roof followed by a rolling noise woke her up again. Thinking nothing of it, she fell back asleep. Just an hour later, around 1:30 a.m, she woke up for a third time, this time to the smell of smoke. George's office was on fire. The room was filling with thick black smoke, and flames were starting to crawl up the walls. Jenny screamed, waking George, who immediately yelled for their older sons, John and George Jr., who also slept downstairs. The parents and 4 of their children, Marion, John, George Jr., and baby Sylvia, scrambled out of the burning house, but 5 children were still missing. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty were trapped upstairs in the attic. Panic took over. The staircase was already a wall of fire, completely blocked. George, desperate to save his children, ran outside to grab the heavy ladder he always kept leaning against the house, but it was gone, vanished. Frantically, he tried to drive one of his coal trucks up to the side of the house to climb on top and reach the attic windows, but neither of his trucks, which had worked perfectly just the day before, would start. Helpless, the surviving Sodders could only stand in the snow and watch in horror as their home was swallowed by flames, collapsing into the basement in just 45 minutes. They assumed their 5 children were dead, but their nightmare was only just beginning. Every attempt the family made to get help was met with baffling failures. When Marion ran to a neighbour's to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, the operator didn't respond. A call from a tavern downtown also failed to get through. It was later discovered that the Sodders' phone line hadn't been burned, it had been cut. Inexplicably, the fire department, located just 2.5 miles away, didn't show up until morning, nearly 7 hours after the fire started. By then, the Sodder home was nothing more than a smoking pile of ash. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, claimed the delay was because he had to wait for someone who could actually drive the truck to become available. After a brief 2-hour look through the rubble, Chief Morris told the grieving parents they'd found nothing, no bones, no organs, no human remains of any kind. He suggested the fire must have been so hot that it had completely cremated the children's bodies. Just days later, 5 death certificates were issued, citing fire or suffocation as the cause of death. The fire itself was officially blamed on faulty wiring. But for Jenny Sodder, that explanation was impossible to accept. She started doing her own simple, heartbreaking experiments, burning animal bones in the yard to see if they'd be completely destroyed. They never were. She even spoke to an employee at a local crematorium who confirmed her fears. Bones don't just disappear, even in 2,000-degree heat, for over 2 hours, far hotter and longer than the 45-minute house fire. The family's doubt grew into a conviction. The official story made no sense. How could a fire that left behind parts of appliances and a tin roof completely destroy every trace of 5 children? And what about all the other bizarre details? The missing ladder, later found thrown down an embankment, the trucks that wouldn't start, the cut phone line, the strange visitors in the months before. George and Jenny became convinced the fire wasn't an accident, but a deliberate act of arson meant to cover up a kidnapping. They believed their children weren't dead, they had been stolen. Fueled by a desperate hope, the Sodders refused to let the case close. George bulldozed the site of his former home, not to erase the memory, but to turn it into a memorial garden for his children. In 1952, they put up a large billboard on Route 16 with the smiling faces of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny and Betty. It offered a $5,000 reward for information, which they soon doubled to $10,000. This billboard became a haunting local landmark for over 30 years, a constant public symbol of a family's refusal to give up. George and Jenny poured their life savings into the search, hiring private detectives and chasing down every lead. Tips and sightings flooded in from all over the country. A woman at a tourist stop 50 miles away claimed she served the children breakfast on Christmas morning with a man and woman in a car with Florida license plates. A hotel worker in Charleston, West Virginia, saw their pictures and said she'd seen 4 of the 5 children about a week after the fire, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women who seemed to be of Italian descent. George drove across the country to investigate every claim. He heard Martha was in a convent in St. Louis and went there. He heard a story about a conversation in a Texas bar about a Christmas Eve fire in West Virginia and looked into that too. Each lead ended in a dead end, but his hope never died. Back home, the family uncovered even more problems with the official story. They were told the fire was electrical, but the Christmas lights on their tree had stayed on in the early stages of the blaze. If faulty wiring was the cause, the power should have been out. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery came from the fire chief himself. Years later, after hearing rumours, Chief Morris admitted to George that he had found a box containing what he said was a beef liver and buried it in the rubble. He hoped the family would find it, believe it was human remains, and give up their search. This cruel and bizarre deception only strengthened the Sodders' determination. In 1949, George funded his own excavation of the site, bringing in a pathologist from Washington, D.C. The dig turned up a few small objects and, most importantly, several pieces of human vertebrae. Hope surged through the family, but it was quickly crushed. They sent the bones to the Smithsonian Institution for analysis. The report was a bombshell. The vertebrae belonged to a single person, aged between 16 and 23. The oldest missing Sodder child, Maurice, was only 14. The report also stated the bones showed no signs of ever being in a fire. They were likely in the filled dirt George had used for the memorial garden. Instead of answers, the family was left with even more questions. Years bled into decades. George Sodder passed away in 1969, never knowing what happened to his children. Jenny, who wore black in mourning for the rest of her life, continued to tend the memorial garden. And then, in 1968, more than 20 years after the fire, a piece of evidence arrived that was so specific, it reignited the entire mystery. Jenny received an envelope in the mail postmarked from Kentucky with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid to late 20s. He had dark curly hair and dark eyes. The family was shocked by his uncanny resemblance to their son Louis, who would have been about that age. On the back was a cryptic handwritten note: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, ill boys, a 90132 or a 90135. The family hired another private detective to investigate this new lead, sending him to Kentucky, but the detective was never heard from again. Fearing that making the photo public could put their son in danger, the Sodders kept some details private, adding the new photo to their billboard, but holding back the information from the postmark. The identity of the man in the photo and the meaning of that strange code remains a mystery. The theories about what happened that night are numerous and dark. The most prominent one, held by the family, points to the Sicilian mafia. They believe George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini made him a target and that the children were kidnapped in retaliation. This theory was supported by the sightings of Italian-looking people with the children and the threats George had received. Jenny Sodder passed away in 1989 and the family finally took down the weathered billboard that had stood for so long. The remaining children and their children continued to search for answers. Sylvia, the baby carried from the fire, was the last of the Sodder children who was in the house that night. She passed away in 2021, carrying the weight of her family's grief and her promise to her parents to never let the story die. Today, the Sodder children's disappearance remains one of the most enduring cold cases in American history. It's a story of a devastating fire, a botched investigation, and a trail of bizarre clues that lead everywhere and nowhere at once. It's a testament to a family's unbreakable love and their refusal to accept an official story that never added up. Nearly 80 years have passed. The house is long gone, replaced by a garden of memory. The parents and all 10 of their children have now passed away, but the questions still burn. Were 5 children tragically lost in an accidental fire, their remains mysteriously destroyed? Or was something far more sinister at play that Christmas Eve, a carefully planned arson to cover up the abduction of 5 children who may have lived out their lives under new identities, forever looking over their shoulders? The official case may be closed, but the debate is far from over. What do you think happened to the Sodder children? Was it a tragic accident, a mafia kidnapping, or something else entirely? Share your theories in the comments below.